I am one of those people who spent 4 years growing up on television. I was Laurie Partridge of the Partridge Family. From the time Susan Dey first appeared on the show in 1970, she won America over with her porcelain beauty and calm demeanor. However, behind her trailers, beyond camera flashes, and deep within the carefully guarded walls of her privacy, she lived a far more complicated story that unfolded quietly behind trailers, beyond camera flashes, and for decades, Susan Dey refused to feed the celebrity machine. She made shocking decisions, kept shocking secrets, and quietly disappeared, leaving behind a legacy that is more mystifying than scandalous at times. Understand Susan Dey in her true form, try not to gasp. The casting that shouldn't have happened. Hollywood was a machine, polished, rehearsed, and relentlessly competitive in an era when aspiring actresses fought tooth and nail for every screen test. Susan Dey's ascent to national fame felt almost accidental, even miraculous, as she wasn't trying to be an actress. At the age of 17, Susan was a fresh-faced model who was featured in teen magazines like 17 and was known for her wide, inquisitive eyes and girl-next-door charm. It was in one of these print spreads that casting directors for a new ABC project noticed that the network was developing a show loosely inspired by the real-life musical Family the Cows, a sunny scripted sitcom about a band of siblings managed by their single mother. They needed someone who could portray Laurie Partridge, the eldest daughter, cleverly. Graceful and grounded. Someone in casting pointed to Susan's image and stated, "That's her." It didn't matter that Susan had zero acting experience, not a single screen credit, no theater classes, no dramatic monologues tucked in her back pocket. She had never even stood in front of a film camera, but something about her look, that perfect blend of innocence and poise, made producers believe she could carry it. She was flown in, handed sides, and given a crash course in screen presence the first few days on set were brutal. Insiders later said Dey looked like she was on the verge of bolting during her early readings. She didn't know how to hit a mark or project her voice. She flubbed lines. Her hands trembled slightly when directors yelled, "Action." However, Dey's inherent instinct made up for her lack of instruction. She observed co-stars like Shirley Jones and producers noticed that Susan Dey mimicked their timing and facial expressions, but it wasn't smooth. According to one assistant director, she didn't socialize much and avoided small talk and group lunches. At first, she didn't seem to want to be there, and maybe she didn't. Some blamed this on her youth, while others realized that she was a girl thrust into a life she hadn't chosen and was trying her hardest not to drown in it. What no one anticipated was how well she'd take to the role on screen. Laurie Partridge was self-assured, witty, and captivating, and her fan letters poured in. Suddenly, Susan Dey was no longer a model. She was America's sweetheart, but behind the glassy studio lights and canned laugh tracks, she remained a reluctant star still figuring who. If you watched The Partridge Family, you would think that Susan Dey was the epitome of calm composure, the voice of reason amid her siblings' chaos, with a quick smile and a sharper mind. However, when the cameras stopped rolling, the transformation was striking. According to a longtime crew member, even when we were just hanging around between takes, she would not join the banter. Instead, she would smile and nod politely before slipping away to her trailer, where other cast members, such as the effervescent Danny Bonaduce or teen heartthrob David Cassidy, embraced the attention. Dey recoiled from it. Interviews made her visibly uncomfortable, and autograph sessions left her exhausted. She wasn't rude or aloof, she was just guarded to her fame. It didn't feel like an accomplishment, it felt like exposure at the time, and quietness in a young actress was often. Susan Dey's parents died when she was 8 years old, a traumatic loss that may have deepened her introspective nature and fueled a need for emotional control that was difficult to maintain on a busy TV set. On set, Dey had her rituals. She would arrive early, script in hand, and run her lines quietly by herself. She never caused problems, never raised her voice, but she didn't indulge in the long, silly conversations that often bonded cast members together. When breaks came, she disappeared. When rap was called, she was among the first to leave. Another cast member recalled, "You'd look around and wonder where she'd gone, yet her presence was." Unquestionably, when the cameras were rolling, she delivered her lines with a maturity beyond her years. There was something about her stillness, a gentle strength that gave Laurie Partridge unexpected depth. Directors began to lean into it, giving her more emotional storylines, trusting that she could hold her own even alongside seasoned actors. In a way, her introversion gave her performance a rare authenticity. Day's quiet resolve became a kind of armor, a shield against the chaos of early fame, while others stumbled under the weight of sudden celebrity. The chemistry between Laurie and Keith Partridge, especially the golden-haired David Cassidy and the elegant, mysterious Susan Day, was genuine to fans. For a while, it was behind the camera, and a teenager was enamored with Cassidy from the beginning. He was charming, rebellious, and already being hounded by fans. Insiders on set could tell that Susan was part older brother, part enigma, because she kept her crush quiet, but he was intrigued by her for a while. He later revealed in his autobiography that Susan fell in love with him, and for a while, he was intrigued by her as well. However, the timing was never right, as Cassidy was juggling the demands of fame, constantly touring, and leading a hedonistic lifestyle, which he didn't bother to conceal until the post-P. Partridge years. The two did start a romantic relationship, but to Cassidy, it was short-lived. He later admitted to ending things abruptly, and in a way, Susan never fully forgiven him for making her vulnerable with him. A mutual friend later said that when it ended, it wasn't just heartbreak, but betrayal. What made things worse was Cassidy's decision to write about their relationship in stark, unsentimental terms in his 1994 memoir. He openly described the details of their intimacy that Susan had never intended for public consumption. The private girl who had always hidden behind the role of Laurie was suddenly exposed. She felt humiliated, said a producer from her later show L.A. Law. That was the final straw. After that, Susan shut that entire chapter of her life away and kept it there. Partridge family reunions. She turned down every interview that even suggested going back to those years for Susan. The door had closed and it was locked tight, and the standards of beauty didn't help either. When Susan Day was a teen idol in the 1970s, the camera was merciless, the expectations were high, and the pressure to be perfect never let up. For a young woman who was already prone to self-criticism and anxiety, the scrutiny became oppressive. Day maintained a strict routine. She rarely ate with others and was frequently spotted choosing a salad or sipping black coffee. Soon after, those around her started to worry that she was getting thinner, her cheekbones sharpened, and that wardrobe assistants had to change her costumes more frequently. Day suffered from an eating disorder during her adolescence, which was never publicly acknowledged but was subtly acknowledged in studio whispers. One costume designer later stated, "We were told not to comment on her weight, but we noticed everyone noticed." It's telling that in 1972, when Day was just 19 years old, she co-authored a book on teen advice called Susan Day's Secrets on Boys' Beauty and Popularity. Although it was marketed as a light-hearted and enjoyable guide for girls, parts of the book read more like a subliminal plea for help, discussing the value of being slender, maintaining self-control, and always looking put together. The advice contained the echo of a young woman attempting to live up to an impossible image, with tips like how to camouflage flaws or make yourself seem more outgoing, reflecting her own internal struggles. The shy girl who had once stumbled through early table reads of the Partridge family had by the mid-1880s retreated almost entirely from the spotlight. Casting directors remembered her fondly but assumed she was finished, another teen starlet swallowed by the industry's indifference. However, in 1986, when Stephen Bacco and Terry Louise Fisher were assembling the cast for a bold new legal drama L.A. Law, everything changed. In later years, Susan Day rarely talked about her teenage fame or her physical appearance, but the silence spoke volumes. Perhaps this was because she had experienced the most extreme form of beauty culture and carried the scars invisibly. In her early 30s, she was not the obvious choice to play the role of Grace Van Owen, a sharp, idealistic district attorney with a steely backbone. One casting agent recalled, "They remembered the pretty teenager from the Partridge bus, but Susan changed their minds the minute she walked into the room." What followed was one of the most stunning reinventions in television history. Day wasn't just good, she was magnetic. She portrayed Grace with a cool intelligence and deep emotional complexity, there was steel behind her stare and sorrow beneath her poise. She won a Golden Globe in 1988 and received 3 consecutive Emmy nominations. Susan Dey wasn't a former teen idol, she was a powerhouse, and perhaps what made her performance so powerful was that Grace Van Owen represented the woman Susan had become: sophisticated, principled, and subtly fierce. The role was more than just a career move, it was a reclamation. She had complete control over her image as a fellow cast member. No one was telling her how to smile, dress, or speak anymore. She had arrived, and in that transformation, she accomplished something that few child stars ever do: she transcended the character that once defined her. Perhaps because she was willing to take risks, Hollywood didn't. After her success in LA Law, many assumed Susan Dey would settle into safe, prestigious projects, such as courtroom dramas, medical procedures, or wholesome family roles. However, she ventured into dangerous, controversial territory, not for scandal, but for substance. One of her first daring decisions came even before LA Law, with Looker, a Michael Crichton directed a sci-fi thriller that explored a terrifying future of digital exploitation and computerized beauty standards. They played a high-fashion model caught up in a technological conspiracy that blurred the lines between identity eraser and body image media control. At the time, the film was criticized for being too strange and stylized, but decades later, it was hailed as prophetic Looker, foretelling a world of CGI influencers, manipulated realities, and beauty standards dictated by machines. At its core, Susan Dey was hauntingly believable as a woman who stripped both literally and metaphorically of her agency. The producer said that she didn't do it to be edgy, she did it because it mattered. Next came Echo Park 1985, a gritty independent drama in which Dey played May, a struggling single mother who turns to stripping to support her teenage son. The role shocked audiences because it wasn't one role at a time. Susan Dey distanced herself from the expectations of the industry in 1988, just 2 years into her LA Law comeback. This wasn't nostalgia, this was raw, unfiltered pain, and it showed a woman struggling in the shadows of Los Angeles, far removed from the fantasy of the Partridge Bus. Some critics dismissed the film because it deviated from her wholesome persona, but others praised her courage for intentionally making people uncomfortable. One former co-star said she was challenging the notion that beautiful women should always be smiling. Dey knew these weren't career-defining hits, but they gave her the opportunity to explore the parts of womanhood that Hollywood typically ignored. Have been her most audacious move to date. That year, she married Bernard Safran Sky, a well-known television executive who had 2 children from a previous relationship. The wedding was small and almost unnoticed by the media. There were no glossy magazine spreads or People magazine exclusives, just an unwavering and unapologetic commitment. From that point on, Susan's life became a fortress. She refused to follow the celebrity circus that surrounded so many celebrities of her generation. She didn't have to make public declarations of love or loss, nor did she receive updates or podcast interviews. She didn't want to play the role of a celebrity wife or stepmother, she said to a colleague. She wanted a real life, and she found it with Bernie. However, those who have visited their home life describe it as being remarkably normal, quiet dinners. Susan Dey defied the odds, unlike many child stars, by successfully reinventing herself from sitcom fame to serious drama. Her role as Grace Van Owen on LA Law earned her a Golden Globe and critical acclaim. She also became a hands-on stepmother, attending school events and family outings without an entourage in sight. She claimed that a longtime friend in Hollywood never understood that part of her, and that was by design, unlike so many others who paraded their personal lives for attention. Susan chose peace, and while the world guessed her whereabouts, she was living exactly the life she wanted, one that required no audience. The public viewed her as calm, articulate, and dignified. She was no longer Lori Partridge. However, as her career took off, she abruptly stopped appearing in public. Friends claim that this was intentional because, after marrying television producer Bernard Sopronsky in 1988 and helping raise his children from a previous marriage, Susan started to value her private life over the stage lights, drama, fame, and constant reinvention. It had taken its toll on her. She was exhausted, according to one LA castmate, not only physically but emotionally. I believe she simply wanted to be a human again, and she turned down offers that conflicted with her values. Her decision to retire was never formally announced. She gave no interviews, no farewell statements, no dramatic farewell tour. She just stepped away, and the silence became its own kind of statement. She had given the industry everything she had, and now she was choosing peace and the freedom to turn down a role that many would have killed for the star who turned down sex. She was approached for early roles in a very popular TV show and other edgy cable shows, but she declined because she didn't want to bear herself physically or emotionally for a character that didn't feel authentic.